Elpida Hadzi-Vasileva is probably our most international artist that we have here today. And you've been commissioned by Coastal Currents in the past, and you've worked with fish skin in the Fishing Museum, which was an amazing installation. I've got a really long CV for you here, and I feel like I don't want to read through it because I think people can find it online, but I'd really like to hear your answers to the questions.
I was very much interested in place and spaces, so I ended up finding work through residencies and visiting different areas. So I spent a lot of time travelling within the country and internationally, which then fed in my work, and my work was very site-specific, so I was more and more interested in the site and the placement of the work. So I create a very kind of large-scale installations. I work a lot with architects. So I've always been interested in how the viewer experiences the work, not just by visually, but also by every possibility, like using their own all the senses, basically, smell, touch. So a lot of the time when you come into my installations, there's a smell presence, and you will be experiencing that. So yeah, it's been progression through working for different residencies, commissions, which I've continued doing that the rest of my life, really. So yeah.
And how important is working near the sea and on the coast to you and to your work?
It's more about being close to nature, I think, is important for me, because my work deals with I work with natural materials, especially waste. Everything that's been refused and thrown away, I take away and then make something with it. The sea is just really nice because I lived in Browton for a long time. I've moved away now, I'm not near the sea, but I do work near the sea. So I wouldn't say the sea is like, it's lovely as a fresh air, but not as, I'd rather spend time in the forest than the sea, actually. Yeah.
But it's interesting, it's a bit like Joe, is that it's the opportunities that the coast gives you in terms of open space and a natural environment.
Yeah.
So Coastal Currents commissioned you in the past with a piece hung in the Shipwreck Museum at Rockernor. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. The piece was actually originally commissioned for the Town Gallery in 2010 as a big wall piece, and was the first wall piece I've ever done. Everything up to that point has been kind of space orientation pieces, and this was like a piece that you can see from a distance. And the piece was inspired by the landscape, by the white cliffs, but I wanted to work with a very kind of unusual material, which was choosing the fish skins. And in particular, I wanted to create a drawing that was inspired by Violis, which was a drawing of the cliffs in a sense, but looking at. It was a quite political piece, which a lot of people don't pick on that, because it was a recording from a heartbeat of a salmon being bred in a farm. So kind of taking from this kind of closeness of how the fish was bred and particular sizes. So every time I made tiles, there were 960 tiles in total. They were made in sequence and kind of arranged as a drawing, but each tile was a one half of a fish. It just gave you the feeling how everything was so mass produced to a particular size and then killed to be sold. And then the skins itself got taken away. Probably 70 to 60% were thrown away, and the rest of it was produced into cats and dogs' food. So it was a kind of easy material to get hold of, but material that I had to really spend months and months cleaning and preserving and treating. So the work that we showed at the museum for Coastal Currents was just a small section of the piece, which I think it worked quite well. Originally we were thinking about showing in a fish shop on the corner. Can't remember what the fish shop was called, but and I'm quite glad that we chose the museum, because it would have been probably destroyed if it was shown in the fish shop. But the location of the work was quite good. So
you said preparing the fish skins was a really slow and arduous process, and that sort of repetitive slow process is an important part of your art discipline.
Yeah, my work, I'm afraid, does. I don't eat a lot of things that I work with. I spend months and months through testing, through preservation, until I get to the final product. So, for example, that piece was made over a year period of skinning salmon. Everything was delivered to my workshop as frozen in crates and went straight back into freezers, and then sections taken out. So from cleaning the meats on the back of the skins to treating and preserving. I hardly work with fish anymore because I've developed lots of allergies, because fish is quite particular. A lot of chefs actually would have a fish allergies, and it's quite I don't know if fishmongers do develop fish allergies, but it's a quite particular material, and it goes into your skin. It's not like any other meat. Your skin absorbs the smell, so I actually used to stink on fish. I would walk into shops in clean clothes, but people would turn around and look at me like I was a scum, basically. It's quite
so like you became a mermaid, you absorbed the fish. Wow. How was your experience working with the festival, and is working in partnership important to you?
I always work in partnerships, and that's very, very crucial to my work. When it comes to from every potential stages of working with assistants to funders to organizations, developers, architects, and it's a quite vital process for me because it influences the work as well. So sometimes I start working on an idea, and the idea changes, depends on who you're working with and how you're developing the work. So I think working with Coastal Currents has been quite interesting because there were lots of different avenues there, lots of different people, starting from looking at locations and getting to the museum, and then getting to know the museum people, and yes.
Thank you. And we've seen the Gilded Elm, the project Preston Mark that you're currently working on, and you've come literally over from working on that this morning. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Which the two famous trees in Preston Park in Browton. One of them sadly got devastated by the Dutch elm disease and got cut down in 2019. I took on the project as pro bono. There was no funding, there was nothing available, but I was invited to look at this tree because it was destined to be burned, and I just couldn't see it being burned, so I said, could you give me some time so I can see. We were just coming out of lockdown, and I was quite quiet with work, so it was quite good timing. So it's been an interesting progression, and it's been 2 years of working. Actually, one of my assistants is here, Alison. She's been working with me, and we spend a lot of time. This is about partnerships, actually, a very important project. We're bringing the whole community together and getting the funding, not just as a cash funding, but lots of help in kind and materials budgets, and so it's been a quite interesting project. Browton, if you don't know, has got the biggest collections of elm trees, and elm trees are very rare. They don't survive because they get devastated by the beetle, and they breed in different species at the moment of different elms, putting them together to make them resistant to the beetle, but they're not really succeeding. So Browton is a quite important location in history for this, and these two particular elms, which are planted in 1916, are very important for the city. So we'll be having the launch next month. We are getting to the final stage now, so if any of you are in the area, please come and see us, or come and see the work. I built the work back in Preston Park, so it's on its original location, together back with its twin. The twin was given to the Jubilee last year to the Queen, so it's marked as a very important species, but it was also diseased last year, so they've, fingers crossed, they've caught the disease on time, and they'll monitor it now for another year, and if they were successful, that would then last and survive.
Okay, so one of the twin trees is still growing, and then the one that you've been working with, is it going to be installed near its twin?
It's been installed about a year now. It's gone back to its original location, so I've been working on site where it was meant to be, or where it was going. So it's kind of, when the scaffolding comes down, you'll see the original cutting mark of the floor. So it's juxtaposition slightly off-site from, and it's on stilts, so it's off the floor. The tree itself has kept its original shape. We haven't changed the shape at all. We just preserved it, made it stable, because it was very badly decomposed. So there's been a lot pinning, which you can't even see. A lot of work gone into it, and the outside is treated with tinted black oils and preservatives, and the inside is gilded with Dutch metal. Dutch metal is a fake gold leaf. Sadly, we couldn't get the funding needed for. My original idea was to purely gild it with gold inside to make it like a proper jewel. I do gilding in my work a lot, so that's another area that I do. But it looks. I'm quite pleased with the work. It looks good.
It's really interesting hearing you talk about, I suppose, the slow speed of developing these projects. And you're a very patient person and a very tenacious person. And those skills are really important, as well as your creative skills. And I find that fascinating hearing you talk about that, and the fact that resilience and persistence is obviously, they're really important skills for someone who wants to have a long-term professional career as an artist.
I think so. I think you have to be, I always say this to my students, you have to be made out of stone sometimes, because the more rejections you get, the more you got to get back on your feet and get back. Because, the things that sometimes we apply for in funding, and you might win one in, 20, 30. So you have to be quite resilient to all this. But at the same time, I think the rewards are quite good, so there's something there that keeps you going. I don't know what that is, but I guess it's no matter how difficult it's been for me, as soon as I get back into my studio, I forget about it. So I think that's how I explain it, the good benefits or the way you feel about being in your own space, I think, in your own head, and you shut everything else.
Maybe it's part of the whole problem solving, which is part of your creative practice. And so, you talked about getting funding from the Wellcome Foundation, which is really interesting, because last week when we had a discussion, Polly Gifford was here, and we were talking about Arts Council funding and how it's getting harder and harder. And so looking for alternative sources of funding is really important. And I imagine that working with the Wellcome Foundation must be fascinating.
It was. Sadly they don't fund arts projects anymore. They cut down the funding, unfortunately. But it was good, but you have to do it as a collaboration with the scientist. It has to be connected to the scientific work. And I've done lots of work within hospitals, and because I'm very much interested in the disease of things, this is where most of my works evolves from. So the stomach, the bacteria, the guts, so everything I make is made from internal stuff. And I actually got invited in by accident in 2011. I worked in Michelin star restaurant in London as one of the first artists in restaurants, they called it, where I spent 9 months in the kitchen. And I got invited by the Wellcome, by a member from the Wellcome Trust to even apply for the funding. That's how the whole thing started. But I have been funded by Arts Council quite a lot. I don't work in the commercial world very well. My work somehow has always been through the publicly funded avenues. I'm trying to slowly change that, because funding is getting tougher. But I've had lots of support in terms of funding. I can't complain.
That's really interesting. Thank you so much.